Jesus on Trial by Tim and Jenny Wood, illustrated by Fran Thatcher. It was the time of the Passover. Jesus told his disciples that they were going to Jerusalem for the feast. "Go to the next village," Jesus said to two of the disciples. "You will find a donkey tied up there. Bring it here. If anyone asks what you are doing, just tell them the master needs a donkey and will soon send it back." When the two returned with their donkey, the disciples put their cloaks on the donkey's back to make a saddle. News that Jesus was coming spread through Jerusalem like wildfire. People rushed out to see him. Some threw their cloaks on the ground in front of the donkey. Others threw flowers and palm branches. Everyone cheered and cheered. "It's the Son of David! It's the King!" the cry went up. Only the priests did not join in. "Tell your followers to be quiet," they ordered Jesus. "It wouldn't make any difference," replied Jesus calmly. "Even if the people did not cheer, the stones on the ground would." The next morning, Jesus went to the temple to pray. He was horrified to find that the outer courtyard looked more like a market than a holy place. It was packed with stalls, animals, moneylenders, traders, and shoppers. The noise was terrific. Jesus became angry. He marched up and down, overturning tables and driving the animals and people away. "God said the temple should be a place where people come to pray," he cried. "You have turned it into a den of thieves." Once the temple area had been cleared, Jesus started to speak and teach. Crowds of sick people gathered, hoping to be cured. Jesus healed them all. The priests were furious. They were jealous that Jesus was so popular. They did not like the way he criticized them. They began to plot to get rid of him, but they were too afraid to arrest Jesus, as he always seemed to be surrounded by huge crowds. The priests were delighted when one of the disciples came forward with a secret plan to help them. At first, Judas Iscariot had been glad to be one of the disciples, but as he began to realize that Jesus was not the type of king to reward his followers with money and power, Judas became more and more bitter. Then one day, Jesus said something very strange. "I will soon be arrested and put to death," he told the horrified disciples. Judas realized that if this was true, he would never be rich and important. So that night, while the disciples were eating their evening meal, Judas slipped quietly away and spoke to the chief priests. "If you pay me well," he said, "I'll help you find Jesus on his own so you can arrest him." The priests were delighted and offered Judas 30 silver coins. He accepted. "But I want to be paid in advance," he whispered. Soon Judas was creeping through the streets with a fat purse tied to his belt. At last, the day of the Passover arrived. Jesus and the disciples went to eat the feast in a house in Jerusalem where preparations had been made. Seeing the sad look on Jesus' face, the disciples grew quiet. "This is the last time we will eat together," Jesus said softly. "One of you will soon give me away to my enemies." "It's not me," they each protested indignantly. Only Judas kept quiet. "Who's the traitor?" the disciples asked. Jesus refused to tell them, and the disciples were too busy arguing with each other to notice Judas slipping away. After supper, Jesus and the disciples went for a walk up to Mount of Olives. At last they reached the quiet garden of Gethsemane. "Sit here and rest," Jesus told the disciples. "I am going further on to pray." Peter, James, and John went into Jesus to keep him company. But while Jesus prayed, they fell asleep. A little later, the sound of Jesus' voice stirred them. "Wake up," they heard Jesus said. "Here come my enemies." The disciples saw some of the high priest's guards and an angry mob approaching. They were led by Judas Iscariot. Judas walked straight up to Jesus and kissed him on the cheek. This was a signal the guards had been waiting for. They rushed forward and seized Jesus as if he were a common criminal. Peter drew his sword and ran forward to defend Jesus. He slashed wildly at the guards, cutting off the ear of one of the high priest's servants. "Put away your sword, Peter," said Jesus gently. "If I wanted to go free, I could call a whole army of angels to rescue me." Jesus told the servant's wounded ear and healed it. The disciples realized there was nothing they could do, took to their heels. The guards led Jesus away. Jesus had taken to the house of the high priest in question all night long. The priests were desperate to find proof that Jesus had broken their Jewish laws. They called witnesses who told lies about what Jesus had said and done, but the priests could prove nothing because they needed two witnesses to say the same thing, and none of the stories agreed. Finally, the high priest lost his temper. He leaned forward. "Are you the Son of God?" he asked. "I am," replied Jesus calmly. "That's all we need to hear," cried the high priest. "Your own words make you guilty. It is against Jewish law to claim to be the Son of God. The punishment will be death." Jesus was blindfolded and taken away. The priests had no power to carry out Jesus' execution themselves. Only the Roman rulers could do that, so early next morning, Jesus had taken to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. This time, the priests had to try to suggest ways in which Jesus had broken Roman laws. "This man had been stirring up trouble," they said. "He has been telling people not to pay their taxes to Rome, claiming that he is a king." Pilate questioned Jesus for a long time. He could not think of a single law that Jesus had broken. But Pilate was worried about letting Jesus go free. He knew that the priest supporters might start a riot if they heard that Jesus had been released. So when Pilate realized that Jesus came from Galilee, he sent him to be questioned by King Herod, who ruled that region. Pilate hoped that Herod would decide what would happen to Jesus. But Jesus remembered how Herod had ordered his cousin John to be killed, and he refused to speak. Herod was furious. He and his followers made fun of Jesus, then sent him back to Pilate. Pilate spoke to the crowd who gathered outside his palace. Jesus has done nothing wrong, he announced, but his voice was drowned by shouts of crucify him, crucify him. Pilate tried another plan. I always set one prisoner free at Passover, he shouted. This year, let it be Jesus. But the crowd roared louder still. Kill him, set Barbatus free instead. Barbatus was a terrorist. Pilate did not want to set him free, but he didn't want the crowd to get any angrier. So Pilate sent for a basin of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I wash my hands of this matter, he announced. You must take responsibility for what I am about to do. I will let Barbatus go, and I will order Jesus to be put to death.